Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. To the elite members, thank you for your continuous love and support. With that being said, it is time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Unsolved Mysteries, Volume 25. Right after this intro, there will be an ad, or read the first case, there will be an ad, and after that, there will be no more ads within this video. Disclaimer, some of these cases may use words and/or situations not suitable for all. Listener discretion is highly advised. The Austin Yogurt Shop Murders. Quadruple homicide still unsolved. Murders still unsolved. On December 6, 1991, the bodies of four teenage girls, Eliza Thomas, 17, Amy Ayers, 13, and sisters Jennifer, 17, and Sarah Harbison, 15, were discovered in an I Cannot Believe It's yogurt shop in Austin, Texas. The girls had been shot to death, and at least one of them was sexually assaulted. The store was set ablaze by their assailants, potentially destroying evidence. The senseless tragedy changed the lives of their families forever and haunted the city of Austin as a whole. In an investigation that would see many fruitless leads and false confessions, a resolution remained elusive. Who killed Eliza Thomas, Amy Ayers, Jennifer Harbison, and Sarah Harbison? Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy. Jennifer Ann Harbison was born on May 9, 1974, in Bowie County, Texas, to parents Barbara and Skip. Athletic, outgoing, and funny, Jennifer was on the varsity track team and was also the president of Lanier High School FFA, or Future Farmers of America, chapter. She was close to her family, including her younger sister Sarah. She, Jennifer, brought joy into the class, remembered geography teacher Ed Gifford. She was more excited about life than any kid I've known. She was one of the best that Lanier has ever had. Sarah Louise Harbison was born on October 28, 1976 in Bowie County, Texas. Like her sister, Sarah was athletic. She was on the volleyball and basketball teams. In addition to these activities, she was a cheerleader as well as an active member of the FFA. Sarah and her boyfriend had been dating for a while, and he'd recently given her his class ring to wear, which quickly became one of her prized possessions. Paul Turner, Lanier High School's then principal. She, Sarah, had already established herself as an assertive and enthusiastic, a vital member of the freshman class. She was a leader, clearly a kid who was going to make a mark on the place. Eliza Hope Thomas was born on May 16, 1974, in Austin, Texas, to parents James and Maria. Eliza, despite her young age, was already a skilled car mechanic and always did her own repairs. She and Jennifer, both 17, were best friends and worked together at the I Cannot Believe It's yogurt shop in North Austin. She was also a member of the FFA, loved animals, and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian and a model one day. She enjoyed makeup, especially lipstick, country music, and poetry. Eliza had always been really nuts about animals, said her father, James. Amy Leah Ayers was born on January 31, 1978 in Johnson County, Texas, to parents Bob and Pam. Though Amy, the youngest of the four, went to Burnett Middle School, she was a member of Lanier High School's FFA chapter as well. Like Eliza, Amy was passionate about animals, with horses and cats being her favorites, and wanted to become a veterinarian when she grew up. She and Sarah Harbison were best friends. "I feel the loss every day," said Amy's father, Bob. "I miss her every day. I really do." Harbison family friend John Bay on the friendship the four girls shared. You couldn't see one without seeing the rest of them. They loved each other. They loved working at the yogurt shop together. They played together, and when it came down to it, they died together. The night of the murders. Friday, December 6, 1991, would mark the first time that Sarah and Amy were allowed to hang out at the mall with no adult supervision. Jennifer dropped the pair off before heading to work, and she was supposed to give them a ride home that night after her shift ended. I Can't Believe It's Yogurt was set to close at 11 p.m. Eliza was working that night too. Sarah and Amy arrived at some point that evening, waiting for Jennifer to finish up so she could take them home. Multiple customers reported spotting two suspicious men sitting at a table. They had a drink and didn't order any frozen yogurt. But it was really their secretive behavior that caught the attention of others. The men kind of leaned over the table, talking to each other, kind of whispering like they didn't want anyone to hear what they were saying. Additionally, they allegedly had a paper bag on the table between them that they kept reaching into. The contents of the bag are still a mystery. One of them was described as being roughly 5'6" tall, in his late 20s or early 30s, with short, dirty blonde hair. The other man was said to be bigger. The strangers were both wearing a large coat, and it is believed that they were driving a green car. There were also mentions of a man who used the bathroom in the back that evening and supposedly took a long time. It's unclear if this was a third unidentified man or one of the two men who'd been seated at the table. However, as it would later be discovered that the back exit was left unlocked, some believe this individual was responsible for unlocking it while he was back there. The two men at the table appeared to have been the last customers there when the girls began the process of closing down for the night. Fire in the yogurt shop. The patrolman called the fire department when he noticed that the yogurt shop was on fire. John Jones, who would be one of the first officers on the scene, stated that he received a call about the fire at 11:27 p.m., leaving a surprisingly small window of time between closing and when the fire was set. The fire was put out, and first responders quickly found the bodies of Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza. Amy, whose body was located in a separate part of the shop, was found last. All four girls was found nude and had been bound and gagged by their own underwear. While it's believed that all of them might have been sexually assaulted, male DNA was recovered from only one of their bodies. Each had been shot in the head. Two different handguns were used, a .380 and a .22, leading investigators to speculate that there had been two assailants. The crime scene was deeply disturbing to the officers. It was dark inside, smoky, burned insulation everywhere, remembered Detective Mike Huckleby. Just the cold feeling of death. I saw things in Vietnam that I thought nothing will ever match that. Well, this matches that, because it's Austin, Texas. It's right down the street from where we live. One by one, the families of the girls were notified of what happened. At 3 o'clock that morning, some people were at my door, and then they said there had been a fire, and they told us that both of my girls were dead, said Barbara. Early suspects. Law enforcement believed that the heinous crime had began as a robbery and escalated from there. Jones spoke on the various investigative avenues they went down trying to find the culprits. They were from all spectrums. We looked at everybody from family members to drifters. Then, 8 days after Sarah, Jennifer, Eliza, and Amy were murdered, investigators got their first promising lead. 15-year-old Maurice Peer was caught carrying a .22 caliber gun in the North Cross Mall. However, because the .22 caliber rounds at the crime scene were untraceable, there was no way to conclusively confirm or rule out Pierce's handgun as the murder weapon. He was interrogated and eventually confessed to the murders, saying that he and 3 of his friends, teenagers Forrest Welburn, Robert Springsteen, and Michael Scott, had committed the crime. Investigators were skeptical that Pierce was telling the truth, so they put a wire on him and had him speak about the murders to one of his friends he'd implicated. To Jones, it seemed obvious that Pierce's friend was genuinely confused as to why he was bringing up the murders and seemingly had no guilt knowledge or involvement in the crime. Yet, in the interest of thoroughly investigating this lead, all four were brought in for questioning. Pierce's three friends denied any involvement in the yogurt shop murders. Due to a lack of solid evidence connecting these four teenagers to the killings, they were all released. However, it's unclear why Pierce was carrying a gun the day he was apprehended. New detectives assigned to the case. A man witnessed sitting in a car outside of the yogurt shop on the night of the murders was considered a person of interest. This suspicion only deepened when it was learned that the composite sketch of him closely resembled the sketch of a man who had been implicated in a recent rape in Austin. This man and another suspect in the rape case were eventually apprehended by authorities in Mexico. They were interrogated and confessed to the yogurt shop murders. But when American investigators reviewed their confessions, they noted that the pair got all of the details wrong, including the caliber of gun they allegedly used. They thought that the Mexican authorities had likely coerced this confession, which both soon recanted, out of the men and that it was actually false. They were ruled out as suspects in the murders of the girls due to lack of evidence. John Jones left the Homicide Division in 1994, though he was still haunted by the murders of Jennifer, Sarah, Amy, and Eliza. A new set of detectives took a fresh look at the case, and by the late 90s, they had focused their attention on the original four suspects: Pierce, Springsteen, Scott, and Welburn. They became convinced that these were the true culprits. Conviction. Over the course of a multi-day interrogation, Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen confessed. Charges were ultimately dismissed against the other two, as they refused to confess and maintain their innocence during the interviews. Scott and Springsteen were put on a trial. Both refused to testify, so the prosecution used excerpts from each man's confession against one another. Scott and Springsteen were convicted, based solely on their confessions, as no other evidence to implicate them was ever found. In 2009, it was ruled that the prosecution had violated the confrontation clause by introducing the men's own confessions as evidence against each other, when neither man was able to cross-examine the other. The convictions were overturned. The DNA recovered from the body of one of the girls, the only forensic evidence in this case, was finally tested and compared against Springsteen, Pierce, Scott, and Welburn. None were a match. The state chose not to retry Springsteen or Scott. It also came out that one of the investigators who questioned them in 1999 had been accused of coercing false confessions out of suspects in another case. Additionally, a detective had allegedly held a gun to Scott's head during his interrogation. Other developments. The families of the four murdered girls struggled with the release of Springsteen and Scott, as they still had no answers or closure. "My family never talked about my sister after she died," said Sonora, Eliza's sister. It's too painful." The DNA evidence led the authorities to an FBI database as an anonymous possible match popped up there. Though the man's name wasn't revealed, it is known that he must have been convicted of a crime at a federal level. However, the DNA from the yogurt shop murders contained only a partial male profile. Because of this, it could be used to definitely rule someone out, but it couldn't be used to make a conclusive match. The original testing of it came back up with only 16 markers. Later testing using more advanced technology managed to turn up 25 markers. According to the FBI, the man in question was ruled out with the more advanced testing, and so his identity was kept private. Law enforcement would receive dozens of false confessions over the course of their investigation, and viable leads remained elusive. To many, it seemed plausible, if not likely, that the two men at the table on the night of the murders, the last customers known to be there, were involved in the crime. But who were they, and where are they now? To this day, they have never been found or identified. The remaining family members of the girls are still hopeful for a resolution. The tragic murders of Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Amy Ayers, and Eliza Thomas are still unsolved. The bizarre disappearance of Jason Jolkowski. Teenager vanishes during walk. On June 13, 2001, Jason Jolkowski, 19, mysteriously disappeared during a half-mile walk to the local high school. He was supposed to meet his coworker there, who was going to give him a ride to work. However, security camera footage would show that Jason never actually made it to the school that day. So, what happened during that brief walk that prevented him from getting there? The investigation into his disappearance but failed to produce evidence of any kind, and it was as if the teenager simply vanished without a trace. What happened to Jason Jolkowski? Jason Anthony Jolkowski. The eldest of two sons, Jason Anthony Jolkowski, was born on June 24, 1981, in Grand Island, Nebraska, to parents Jim and Kelly. Jason was described as shy, intelligent, and kind by those who knew him. He had been a part-time student at Iowa Western Community College in Council Bluffs, Iowa, but had dropped out the previous winter because his family didn't have enough money for him to continue there. However, he was planning to go back to school soon, as he had secured a job as a customer service representative at Seidel Corporation, which was a position that offered more money as well as a tuition program. But for the time being, Jason worked at Fazoli's, a local restaurant. During his time in college, he had a part-time job as a DJ for his school's radio station, which was something he loved. When he was on the air, he was so enthusiastic and so peppy, remembered Sarah James, a fellow DJ. He would do anything for anybody. Jason, whose favorite teams were the Cubs, Huskers, and Broncos, loved watching sports and had a great memory for players' names and stats. Additionally, he was deeply religious and, according to Reverend Edward Vela, had even expressed interest in becoming a priest one day. He was a prayerful kid, noted Vela, very friendly, very quiet. Baffling disappearance. In June 2001, 19-year-old Jason was living at his family's home in Omaha, Nebraska. On June 13th, he received a phone call asking him to come into work early. Since his car was still at the auto repair shop, he had to figure out another way to get to work. So, he called a coworker and arranged to meet her at a nearby Benson High School, roughly half a mile away from his home, and from there she was supposed to drive him to Fazoli's. However, he would never show up. Jason was last seen by a neighbor, Chester Link, who spotted him helping Michael, his younger brother, take the garbage cans back to the garage and then walking in the direction of the school at about 10:45 a.m. When he failed to arrive, his coworker phoned his house at sometime between 11:15 and 11:30 a.m. looking for him, but he was not there. The 8 blocks between the Jolkowski home and Benson High School were made up of quiet residential streets with little traffic. Security camera footage from Benson High School confirmed that Jason never arrived that day. An investigation with no evidence. Jason's parents waited to report him missing until the following morning because they believed, wrongly, that it was necessary to wait a full 24 hours before notifying the police. According to the blog Disappeared, The authorities initially assumed that Jason was just another teenage runaway and did not begin to investigate his disappearance until 10 days after he went missing. But his family and friends were certain that he wouldn't have run away, explaining that his family meant everything to him and that things were going well in his life. According to Jason's friend, Amanda Goodman, he loves his parents and his brother more than anything in the world. He'd be talking to me on the phone, and he'd put me on hold so he could tuck his brother into bed. His family always came first. Jason was described by his parents as considerate and generous, the kind of person who would go out of his way to help others. He was an unusually polite person, said Kelly Jokowski. It's believed that Jason had only his cell phone and no more than $60 on him that day. Nothing else had been taken from his bedroom. The police interviewed friends, family, neighbors, and co-workers, but were at a loss to explain what had happened to Jason. There had been no additional sightings of him, and there was no forensic evidence or even circumstantial evidence to work with in this case. It was as if he had simply vanished without a trace. Jason was also said to have no interest in partying and no known involvement with alcohol or drugs at any point in his life. Following his disappearance, there was no further activity on either his bank account or his cell phone. No suspects have ever been identified in this case, and his coworker was ruled out as a person of interest early on. So, what happened to him? How did Jason vanish in broad daylight during such a short window of time? One of the officers involved in the investigation was quoted as saying Jason's disappearance was the most baffling case he'd seen in 30 years. Theories. In a case like this one with no witnesses or evidence of any kind, one can only speculate as to what might have happened. But the main theory, which his family also believes to be true, is that Jason was lured into a vehicle or home by someone that day and then murdered. Jason's Law. Jim and Kelly Jokowski went on to create Project Jason, a nonprofit organization whose purpose is to provide assistance to the families of missing people. They also lobbied for Jason's Law, which was passed by the Nebraska legislature in 2005 and resulted in the creation of a statewide database for missing persons. Kelly was later awarded a Volunteer for Victims Award from U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, as well as Nebraska Governor's Points of Light Award. Current state of the investigation. According to the Omaha Police Department, the investigation remains open and active, but it is essentially a cold case with no promising leads. In 2021, the Jokowski family gathered with Jason's friends at a park for a grim commemoration, the 20th anniversary of his disappearance. Jason's mother, Kelly Murphy, said, "Unfortunately, with this mark, I will have not had him more years than I had him in my life since he disappeared at the age 19. He was almost 20, but he was 19. That's just hard to fathom. 20 years, that's 2 decades. Murphy recalled a memory from those lost years. We really didn't have a name for it, but it was kind of a who laughs first game. You would say one word, and it was usually something silly. You would just see who would start laughing. And he, Jason, was the one who always lost. We knew he had a tendency to start giggling." Despite the enduring pain of their loss, Jason's family still remains hopeful that one day they'll have closure and definitive answers about what happened to their son. "Hope is your right until you know the truth," Jason's mom added. "Some people try to take hope away from you. They think, well, you should be over that by now. You should be back to normal. Everyone deserves hope." To this day, the bizarre disappearance of Jason Jokowski, a kind teenager with his whole life ahead of him, remains unsolved. the strange disappearance of Danielle Imbo and Richard Petroni Jr. An evening out ends in mystery. On February 19, 2005, two friends, 34-year-old Danielle Imbo and 35-year-old Richard Petroni Jr., made last-minute plans to get together. The pair had dated in the recent past, but this would be the first time they'd seen each other in a while. They met friends at a Philadelphia bar, and by all accounts, the evening was an enjoyable one. Nothing seemed amiss. Shortly before midnight, Richard and Danielle left together, never to be seen again. An extensive search and lengthy investigation into their disappearance would culminate in the FBI's belief that foul play was involved, specifically a murder-for-hire plot. However, solid evidence remained as elusive as Danielle and Richard themselves, and the case soon hit a standstill. What happened to Danielle Imbo and Richard Petroni Jr.? Danielle and Richard. Danielle Imbo was born on August 7, 1970 in South Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to parents John and Felice Audibert. Her father, a singer who went by the stage name Johnny October, rose to fame in the 1950s as a member of the doo-wop group, the Four Dates, which eventually became a backup group for popular singer Frankie Avalon. As the daughter of a musician, Danielle developed a deep love for music and enjoyed singing and attending concerts. She was also an avid reader of murder mysteries and worked as a loan processor. Those close to Danielle knew her as a kind and outgoing person, as well as a dedicated mother to her 18-year-old son, Joe Jr. Richard Petroni Jr. was born on August 29, 1969, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to parents Richard and Margaret. Described as hardworking, laid-back, family-oriented, and compassionate, Richard was a devoted single father to his 14-year-old daughter, Angela, and worked at his family's bakery, Viking Pastries, in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. Like Danielle, Richard loved music, especially rock. Additionally, he enjoyed watching sports and was a fan of the Chicago Bears. Richard and Danielle reconnect. In 2004, Danielle's husband, Joe Imbo, flew to Houston to see the Super Bowl, leaving behind his wife and baby, both of whom had a cold at the time. When he got back, he announced that he had met another woman on the plane and wanted a divorce. Though shocked and deeply hurt, Danielle complied with Joe's wishes, and the two began divorce proceedings. Sadly, the separation took a toll on Danielle, who began chain smoking and dropped an alarming amount of weight. This is when Richard Petroni Jr. came back into her life. Richard and Danielle grew up in the same neighborhood and had known each other for most of their lives. Danielle was close friends with Richard's sister, but had lost touch with Richard over the years. However, they hit it off immediately upon reconnecting and soon began dating. Richard had never felt this strongly about a woman before, according to his daughter Angela. Danielle was the first girl he'd ever fell in love with, wanted to dedicate his time to. Though the pair were happy together, Danielle was still in the middle of a painful divorce and decided that it would be best if she and Richard didn't see each other for a while, so she could put her entire focus on her baby as well as getting through the divorce proceedings. As much as this hurt Richard, he respected Danielle's wishes and stayed away. Joe's temper. Unsurprisingly, Joe's new relationship with a woman he barely knew didn't last, and it wasn't long before he asked Danielle to reconcile and give their marriage another chance. While she still had feelings for her husband, she also felt that a divorce was the right decision and wanted to remain on that path. Joe was allegedly controlling and short-tempered, and his pleas for a reconciliation often erupted into explosive arguments. On one of these occasions, Joe reportedly became so angry that he threw his son's high chair at the wall, though he would later deny this accusation. Danielle and Richard go out together one last time. On February 19, 2005, Richard was eating dinner alone at a bar when he decided that he wanted to go somewhere to see live music. However, he didn't want to go alone, so he called his sister Christine and asked if she'd like to join him. She declined but passed on the invitation to Danielle, who happened to be visiting her at the time. Joe had the baby and was out of town that night. Richard and Danielle hadn't spoken in weeks, but she accepted the invitation to his surprise. He picked her up in his 2001 black Dodge Dakota, and the two of them went to a bar called Ablaze on Philadelphia's South Street, meeting up with Richard's friends, Anthony and Michelle. They watched a band perform, and, by all accounts, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. In fact, Richard and Danielle looked happy and were seen sitting close to each other and kissing inside the bar. They also compared their schedules for the following weekend, as if to plan another date. Anthony and Michelle asked the couple to go with them to another bar, but both declined, explaining that they each had an early morning the next day and didn't want to stay out too late. Then, at approximately 11:45 p.m., they prepared to leave, and Richard was overheard saying he would drive Danielle home to Mount Laurel before returning to South Philly. They walked outside into the evening air together and haven't been seen or heard from since. A quick side note, it's unknown where Richard parked his truck, but it can be reasonably narrowed down because he made a comment to Anthony that night about being happy that he was able to get a parking space so close to the bar. Where are they? The next morning, Danielle missed her hair appointment, and, throughout the day, both her cell phone and Richard's went straight to voicemail. Their families became increasingly concerned. Danielle's brother, John Odebray, decided to go check on her, using the spare key she had given him to enter her home. It was dark inside, and nothing seemed suspicious or out of place. But by 3 p.m., the time Joe Jr. was usually dropped off by his father, Danielle still wasn't home. That's when John knew something was wrong. She wouldn't have missed that. No way, he later remarked. Both Danielle and Richard were close to their families and in frequent contact with them. It wasn't like either of them to vanish with no explanation. When Joe arrived at Danielle's home that afternoon to drop off little Joe, he found her family there, but not Danielle. John tried to cover for her by saying that she couldn't be there right now and had asked him to take care of Joe Jr. in her absence. However, as the hours went by with no word, their families knew something must be wrong and reported them missing. The search began. The search. When night fell, John and Richard Petrone Sr. drove through the city streets and checked the highway routes in search of Richard's truck, slowing to peer down every side street and back alley between Philadelphia and Mount Laurel. They even checked the city's waterways and overpasses, including the Walt Whitman, Ben Franklin, and Betsy Ross bridges. Finally, at sunrise, they went home. That day, friends and volunteers organized a grid search that covered 100 miles in every direction, carrying pictures of Richard's truck and its license plate number, YFH 2319. John spent $1,200 hiring a Camden police officer to commander a helicopter, which they used to scour the city from above. But no one found anything. According to one report, a police deputy said to John, "No one is ever going to find anything." "What do you mean?" John asked. "It's too clean." Despite several extensive searches, no sign of Danielle and Richard or the truck could be located. There were no eyewitness accounts of either of them after leaving the bar. They didn't appear on any of the toll bridge cameras after their departure from Abilene. And when investigators checked their respective bank accounts, credit cards and cell phones, nothing unusual came up. In fact, there was no activity at all. So, what happened to the couple? Theories. A theory that often comes up, considering the fact the truck vanished as well, is that they accidentally drove into the nearby Delaware River. But those familiar with the Philadelphia area believe this is an unlikely explanation, as there isn't easy direct access to the river from the street. Another possible explanation is that they were carjacked and murdered, with the truck taken to a chop shop afterwards and sold for parts. This idea seemed plausible to some. After all, over 13,000 vehicles were stolen in the Philadelphia area in 2004 alone. The FBI and the Philadelphia Stolen Car Squad worked in conjunction to investigate this lead, but it ultimately went nowhere as no evidence of a carjacking could be found. FBI involvement in a missing persons case is relatively rare. So, what compelled them to join this particular investigation? Murder for hire. In 2014, FBI Special Agent Vito Roselli, the investigator in charge of the case, put out a press release stating, "Making two people and a truck disappear with no witnesses and no evidence of any kind for 9 years suggests methodical planning. It's possible a perpetrator could just get lucky, but it's more likely just what it looks like. Someone behind this knew what they were doing." Danielle Embo and Richard Petroni Jr. were, according to the FBI, likely the victims of a murder-for-hire plot. Given how cleanly and abruptly they disappeared without any evidence left behind, this seemed like a plausible explanation. But who would want to hurt them, and why? Suspects. The first people that the authorities looked into were the last ones known to have seen the missing pair before they vanished. Richard's friends, Anthony and Michelle. Both were questioned multiple times, but ultimately, detectives came to believe that neither was involved in the disappearance. The next logical suspect was Danielle's husband. His alibi was soon verified. Joe was 50 miles away at a children's birthday party that day, a party at which his stepfather, a former NYPD officer, was in attendance. Joe took a polygraph test as well, but the results were inconclusive. During the investigation, it was revealed that Joe possessed the password to Danielle's voicemail and had accessed her account multiple times in the months leading up to her disappearance. Another fact that came to light was that Joe made several threatening phone calls to Richard, both at his home and workplace, during the same time frame, warning him to stop seeing his wife. Nevertheless, no solid evidence of Joe's guilt was discovered, and he was adamantly denied being involved. No other suspects have been named. According to J.J. Claver from the FBI, "We're not identifying anybody as a suspect, but we're not ruling anyone out. Everybody is ruled in at this point." Further development. A tip was received from a local waitress about a broken gate near the Delaware River. It appeared that someone had driven through it. A search was conducted of the river in that area, and several vehicles were found, but Richard's Dodge Dakota was not among them. In 2021, the FBI released a new statement reporting that an extensive investigation to date has generated some promising leads. However, neither they nor the vehicle has ever been located. In March 2022, a private Oregon-based search and recovery dive team, known as Adventures with Purpose, announced they were working on the case. The team has solved 11 of its 36 missing person investigations since 2021 and carried out multiple dives into the Delaware River. Doug Bishop, one of the group's members, told CBS, "I know the FBI's position is that there was foul play and that the vehicle has somehow made its way into the chop shop. However, there's no actual information leading to suspect those types of conclusions. So our specialty is water. We know we have a couple that's missing and missing with their vehicle, and we're going to do what we do best. So far, however, no evidence relevant to the disappearance of Richard and Danielle has been recovered from the river. There is a $50,000 reward for information leading to the location of Richard and Danielle, and/or to the arrest or those responsible for their disappearance. Current state of the investigation. The case is still open and being actively investigated by the FBI, Philadelphia Police Department, Mount Laurel Police Department, New Jersey State Police, and the Burlington County Prosecutor's Office. Though the whereabouts of Danielle Imbo and Richard Petroni Jr., as well as the events leading up to their disappearance, remain a mystery, their families are still holding out hope that the case will be solved someday and that they will be able to give their loved ones a proper resting place. If you've ever had that feeling that something's wrong, something's just not right, I think everybody has that once in their life. Just something doesn't feel right. I have that feeling from the time I wake up until the time I go to bed every day. Danielle's brother John, describing what it's like not knowing what happened to his sister. Stephen Clark vanished from a public restroom. Mystery at a seaside restroom. On the afternoon of December 28, 1992, 23-year-old Stephen Clark went for a walk with his mother, Doris. They made what was meant to be a brief stop at the public restrooms in Saltburn, England, before returning home. According to Doris, she last saw her son entering the men's room, but when she exited the ladies' room just minutes later, he was already gone. More than 30 years have passed with no answers and no sign of Stephen. What happened to Stephen Clark? Stephen Charles Clark. One of the two children, Stephen Charles Clark, was born on August 30th, 1969, in Colchester, Essex, England, to parents Charles and Doris, who had both served as police officers. Stephen was in a terrible accident when he was only 2 years old. Doris left the family home to go shopping one day when, unbeknownst to her, Stephen found his way out of the house and had started to follow her. She didn't become aware of this fact until she heard a commotion and saw that her son had been hit by a truck. It's unclear whether or not anyone else was at home watching Stephen that day. Sadly, he spent a month in a coma and was left with a permanently damaged arm and a pronounced limp. Despite his early misfortune, Stephen grew up to be a funny, intelligent, and generally happy person who loved music, bowling, and hanging out at the local pub. He also enjoyed swimming and had an avid interest in computers. Stephen and his sister Victoria grew up in South Africa, but the Clark family eventually returned to England and settled in Mars by the Sea in 1990. He attended the Rathbone Society, an organization in Redcar that assists disabled individuals in finding employment. He worked hard and excelled in his studies, even earning an award for Apprentice of the Year. His achievements notwithstanding, he found the employers often hesitated to give him a chance due to his disability, and his limitations sometimes got him down. Saturday football. Stephen and his father Charles enjoyed attending football games together, usually on Saturdays. Charles often purchased tickets for both of them, but for unknown reasons, he refused to buy Stephen a ticket to the local Middlesbrough match on December 28, 1992, telling him that if he wanted to attend, he'd have to pay for his own ticket. According to Doris and Charles, it was a running joke in the family that Stephen didn't like to pay for anything with his own money. He ultimately opted not to go to the game with his father. Doris and Stephen's last walk together. Charles left home at approximately 2 p.m. on December 28th to drive the 10 miles to the stadium, where Middlesbrough would be playing against Crystal Palace. After he departed, Doris and Stephen decided to take a long walk together on the nearby beach in Saltburn. According to Doris, as they were heading back, Stephen told her he needed to use the restroom. They stopped at a public restroom near the seafront pier of the promenade, located roughly 3 miles away from their home. Doris went into the women's room shortly after her son went into the men's. When Doris came out a few minutes later, she didn't see Stephen anywhere. Assuming he was still in the bathroom, she waited outside the door for several minutes before coming to the conclusion that he must have already left and started walking home without her. Thinking she'd catch up with him along the way, she headed back to the Clark residence on her own. However, she never spotted her son at any point during the walk, and when she arrived home, she found it empty. Strangely, there was no sign of Stephen anywhere. When asked later why she didn't go into the bathroom to see if her son was all right, or to at least confirm that he wasn't in there anymore, she explained, "He would have been horrified. He was 23, not a child." Stephen is gone. It's unknown exactly when Charles got back from the game, but it was sometime after that Doris realized their son was missing. She told him what had happened, and the couple immediately went out to look for him. "I got my car to Saltburn, went all over the place screaming. 28 years, we never heard a word," explained Charles in 2020. Stephen, who was described as being 6'3" with a medium build, blue eyes, and dark brown hair, was last seen wearing a maroon crewneck jumper, a navy blue parka with a fur hood, blue denim jeans, and gray trainers. After a fruitless search, they knew it was time to get the police involved. They reported Stephen missing at 6 p.m. that evening. Doris let them know that she'd witnessed 2 men with a little girl enter the restroom right after Stephen did. These people have never been identified or located. In fact, no one has ever come forward to corroborate Doris's story that she and Stephen were there that day. Nevertheless, the authorities, much like the Clarks, came up with nothing during their search. Not a shred of evidence was discovered that would explain what had happened to Stephen Clark that afternoon. Alleged sightings. In the days and weeks following Stephen's disappearance, several sightings were reported to investigators. A witness who knew Stephen placed him near the Clark house at approximately 3:45 p.m. on the day he went missing. A woman claimed to have seen Stephen from her apartment window 2 days after he vanished. According to her, he was leaving the beach in the company of an older man wearing glasses. However, the police were skeptical of her story. Given the distance between her living room window and the area where the 2 men were allegedly seen, it was unlikely that she would have gotten a clear enough view of Stephen to identify him. It's unknown if she owned a pair of binoculars. On January 14th of 1993, Stan Kamaish, a friend of the Clarks, supposedly saw Stephen in Redcar, less than 10 miles away from Saltburn. He said that he spoke to Stephen but didn't think anything of the encounter because he wasn't yet aware that the young man had been reported missing. Interestingly, Stan changed his story years later, confessing that he not only didn't talk to Stephen Clark that day, but that the man he spotted wasn't actually Stephen, rather someone who merely resembled him. Why he initially lied remains a mystery, and Stan has since passed away. Ultimately, none of the reported sightings could be verified, and with no leads or viable suspects to work with, the case quickly went cold. Additional information. All of Stephen's personal belongings, including his glasses, wallet, and watch, were left behind. Neither his bank account nor his savings account were ever touched following his disappearance. He never claimed his £1,000 money for his Apprentice of the Year prize. Anonymous letter leads to shocking arrest. In 1999, investigators received an anonymous letter that made shocking claims about the true fate of the missing man. Detective Chief Inspector Sean Page described the contents. The letter is very precise in nature. The letter writer intimated that Stephen was dead and that they claimed to know the person responsible. The full contents of this letter were never released to the public. In fact, the existence of the letter was unknown to the public until 2020, when it was finally released in a heavily redacted form. That same year, the case was suddenly reclassified as a murder investigation. Evidently, the author of the letter implicated Charles and Doris in the alleged murder of their son. Following a cold case review by the Cleveland police in September of 2020, the couple was arrested. If the letter was the catalyst for probable cause and arrest, and it appears it was, it's unclear why law enforcement waited so many years to make an arrest. The woman who wrote the letter, whose identity was never revealed, eventually came forward, but she was unable to produce any evidence of the Clarks' guilt. Doris and Charles was released on bail. An extensive forensic search was conducted in the Clark home, as well as their yard, garden, and nearby wooded area, but police found nothing relevant to the case. In February of 2021, after a grueling 17-week investigation, Doris and Charles were officially cleared of suspicion in their son's disappearance. Accused of Murdering Our Son documentary. The couple's ordeal was explored in a documentary entitled Accused of Murdering Our Son, The Stephen Clark Story, which featured the Clarks' interacting with former police officer turned investigative journalist Mark Williams Thomas. Williams Thomas concluded, "If Charles and Doris killed Stephen, then they're the best actors I've ever met. I don't think they killed Stephen." However, a review by The Guardian stated, even as William Thomas proclaims their innocence, certain framing and editing choices subtly undermine him, allowing the film to have it both ways. The family speaks out. After decades of silence, Stephen Clark's sister, Victoria Orr, spoke to the Missing podcast and defended her parents. "Our relationship as a family was love-filled. Stephen and I couldn't have wished for a happier childhood," Victoria recalled. "Stephen going missing has been a living nightmare for all of us," she added. Victoria said there was no way her parents would ever hurt Stephen and criticized the police for relying on the anonymous letter. "I mean, the letter was even addressed to the wrong police force. The name was wrong. It went to a different police force in Geesboro, which is not the police that we're dealing with. So why was it taken so seriously? I really don't know, but it has devastated our family," she said. "It was just awful. The way they were treated was diabolical." Victoria said the Clarks were filing a formal complaint against the police through their solicitor. Was Stephen dating someone? According to Doris and Charles, Stephen was dating a girl he met at the local pub, the Ship Inn, prior to his disappearance. This relationship with the girl lasted about a week or 10 days, Charles said. He liked to go to the local pub. She was there. They were about the same age. They never met other than in the pub. It was days before he went missing. It was not a serious girlfriend. He had not had a serious one. We lived in South Africa, then near London before he came here. Neither parent believed this relationship was related in any way to their son going missing. The Clarks also noted that Stephen's behavior appeared to be normal both on and leading up to December 28th, and that there was no family strife or other problems as far as they knew. The family released a joint statement in 2022. The constant painful limbo of not knowing is a horrible thing to live with. We still hope that he will walk through the door one day, but we appreciate that as each year passes, it becomes more and more unlikely. What happened to Stephen? Detective Mark Williams referred to the case as one of the most bizarre he's ever investigated. Detective Chief Inspector Sean Page said that there are no active lines of inquiry currently, but that they'd continue to respond to any intelligence and information which may help us locate Stephen. The Cleveland and North Yorkshire police indicated that they believe Stephen was in a relationship with a girl he met at the Rathbone Society at the time of his disappearance. It's unclear if there was any significance attached to this piece of information. Aside from his parents, no other suspects have ever been identified in Stephen's case. Theories for why he vanished include suicide, abduction, murder, and leaving to start a new life. But, to this day, nothing substantial has ever been discovered to lend credence to any of them. What happened to 23-year-old Stephen Clark during that brief window of time on the afternoon of December 28, 1992? For now, at least, that remains unknown. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these True Unsolved Mysteries, Volume 25. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the rest of the members of Back to Ashes. Thank you all so much for your continued dedication to this channel. As I always say, without you, I would not have a voice, and there would not be a Back to Ashes, because I would be sitting here talking to the void. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you are new to the channel and you like what you have heard, please leave a like and comment. If you would like to join the Back to Ashes family, please hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell and set it to all. That way you don't miss every time I upload a video. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed these selections. In the meantime, please stay vigilant and take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.